Irene, can you hear me? Okay, we start in 1 minute, and if you can share the link, share with your friends in different groups. This is an updated link. We got an issue with our first link initially, so share the link if you can, and invite people to join in on this great conversation. Okay. It's exactly 10 minutes past 8, and we are going to kick off our space. Other people will be able to join the space later on as time goes on. And this is a recorded space, so if someone misses something or someone wants to listen to something they missed when they jumped on late, they can always go back. I'll introduce myself. I'm Frederick Kaskazini. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm passionate about East Africa and Africa, and I'm very glad to be part of this space tonight, speaking to being part of this conversation, and we shall be listening into a special speaker this evening. Irene.
Yes, my name is Irene Sumari. We host this space every week, and I'm glad that I'm happy to invite everyone that's joining the conversation. I hope everyone is learning from this conversation, and I want to welcome everyone to to be part of this conversation, and I hope we'll give time for those people who will be having questions or anything they want to share later on after we have listened to our speaker today. So yeah, karibuni sana. Let's proceed to the next.
Yeah, Sante. One of the cultures actually we have on the space is if you have a question, if you want to say something here on the space, you can express yourself in English or Kiswahili. It's something that we have been developing over time on this space. So I'll go ahead and invite our speaker tonight, Mwalimu Mutemi wa Kiama. We're very glad to have you on the space, and we're ready to listen in and have this conversation with you. I'll allow you to introduce yourself, and as you introduce yourself, would love to know who is Mutemi wa Kiama, and why do you do what you do? And that question usually helps people understand our speaker better, but also can be a source of inspiration for someone who's doing something similar to what you do, or someone who sees you as a role model, and you are an inspiration to many of us. Karibu Mwalimu.
Thank you so much, Fred. Thank you, Irene. It's an honor to be invited to this space to speak on a very difficult but pertinent subject in our society at the moment. My name is Mutemi wa Kiama. I'm also known as Mwalimu, which in Swahili means teacher. And it's a title that I use because I've been a teacher. I taught high school for 3 years, but also because I love having conversations that are educative from the perspective of teachers being the people who help communities interrogate ideas, adopt new ideas, advance for that matter. They help communities discover knowledge and interrogate that knowledge and solve their problems. So that it's from that perspective that I'm also what is known as an activist, but I consider myself an active citizen and a community organizer. I organize communities around issues that are pertinent to us, issues that we're facing as Africans, as Kenyans, as East Africans, and try to find solutions to those issues. And also to advance ourselves. It's an honor to be here, and I'll leave that introduction here. I guess there are many other things I could introduce myself as. I'm also, I do strategic communications. I consult on strategic communications around advocacy. I'm the team lead of a platform called This is Africa, TIA. You can find it on Twitter and also on Facebook. And yes.
Mwalimu, there's a bit of an issue, I think, either with your speaker or your network. We can't seem to get you clearly.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear. We can hear you, I guess.
Okay. I don't know why you lost me.
It could be your network, I don't know, but your voice seems to be shaky.
Okay. So I'm also the team lead of a platform called This is Africa. On Twitter it is This is Africa TIA, and also on Facebook it's This is Africa, and we have a web platform where we publish stories about Africa, and we hope eventually to be the platform upon which Africans engage with their conversations, both locally and globally. Thank you.
Okay, asante sana. Our first, I think my first question, before we get into the big thing, it's been mental health that we've been discussing, and it's mental health one of the main issues tonight. Do you, Mwalimu, do you have any personal experiences with mental health issues that you'd be comfortable to share? Have you had any experiences with mental health?
Thank you for that question. That's a very good question. Yes, I have. And I think it's from the perspective that we'll be discussing for the period of this space, because it's that level of you having or someone having mental health issues, but thinking they're okay because of how our societies are. And I think when you get into the, I'm not a mental health professional, but I have had a chance to study it from this perspective that this space is about, from the generational trauma. I normally say that, we say we refer, mostly in East Africa, we refer to mental health as madness. And so we only look at the people who in our villages and in our towns are normally classified as mad, as people having mental health. Yes.
Mwalimu, there's still a bit of an issue with your sound. I don't know if it's your sound or the network.
I think, Frederick, it's your internet, because I can.
You can hear clearly.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Please go ahead. Let me try to sort myself.
Okay. Sorry about that. So, we have stigmatized issues of mental health by characterizing mental health as madness, whatever madness means. And there are times when we joke with some friends and colleagues when we talk about madness, and we say maybe the people who we think are mad are the ones who are normal, and the rest of us who are conformists, who are trying to be the same, are the ones who are abnormal, actually are the ones who are mad. So, there's a huge crisis of mental health globally. which is underreported, which is not discussed, which is not debated. And I'll share my experience with it. And how I discovered, and actually that is what led me into the space where what is called the activist space, or the space for active citizens, challenging the status quo, speaking truth to power. And when I came to realize that the box that we are in, that we are socialized and culturalized in by our societies, and especially as Africans, is fundamentally flawed. And it can only lead to issues of mental health. But the challenge being that most of us are not even aware that we have challenges. And I'll give examples. Thank you.
Asante sana. Thank you for that. Mwalimu, from where you sit and with the experiences, why should the youth pay attention to mental health issues, and in particular generational traumas?
Thank you, Fred. So let me delve into what we mean by generation traumas and mental health from that perspective. Now, as Africans, we were uprooted from our traditional societies, most recently by colonialism. But before that, there were other issues, invasions and things like slavery. And our forefathers, our ancestors, had to deal with these issues, such that some of our communities used to raid others, capture their people, and sell them off, to either the Arabs or to later on the Portuguese and the Spanish, basically Europeans. And this would then be used either in the Gulf, in the Arab Gulf, or in the Americas as slaves. And then later on, once slavery was abolished, in quotes, quote unquote, a system was designed that then led to what we refer to as wage slavery, which is basically, if you are to think about the modern economy as it is, it was built on slavery. And then after the abolition of slavery, then has been sustained by what is called wage slavery. And if we look at how, for example, I'll give an example of here in Kenya, where I am, but it's mostly East Africa. I think Kenya and Uganda went through almost similar experiences. That we had these guys who, for their own economic need, when the white people, the British to be specific, were being expelled from India, being pushed away by Indians after 300 years of a presence in India. They needed to continue the trade, especially in spices. And they needed to find a route that was economic to India. And that's how they sent explorers, so-called explorers, coming into the African hinterland, basically looking for the source of the Nile, because the Egyptians were not being very welcoming at the Suez Canal. So they're looking for, there was trouble basically in the Red Sea, and they were looking for another way to access the Indian subcontinent. And so in the process, they came to Africa and found us mostly at peace, with each other, very egalitarian societies, and warlike, very welcoming, living in harmony with nature. And basically went back and told, of the riches in this continent and how easy it would be to come and occupy this continent and basically plunder the continent. And I'm just cutting through because all this information is available. But what I want to emphasize is that some guys, these white people came from somewhere and they just found us here enjoying ourselves, going on with life, and decided to take what was ours. And what they did to our communities, for example, in Kenya, once they sat down in Berlin and subdivided Africa into territories for each of the European powers, then they then had to get us to exploit us. They had to get us into the so-called modern economy. Then the economy then. Remember, the last 400 years, basically the economy has been about cash crops, whether it's sugar, cane, coffee, tea, etc., etc. Then the mining and that kind of thing, wheat, and Africans were not doing any large scale farming. As we were doing, our farming was just enough to feed ourselves and our families and our communities. And so we were not really interested in the European economy. And these guys figured a way to push Africans into the economy, which was quite brutal. I can give examples of what happened in Kenya. Around 1902, they introduced what is called the hat tax. Now, what the hat tax was that any person who had a hat, the traditional African hat, had to pay tax to the government. And you remember, just to track back a bit, initially the people who came here were actually a commercial company called the British East African Company. That's the one that came and established, was trying to extract resources from East Africa on behalf of the founders and the British Crown. Later on, it became a protectorate, the East African Protectorate. And so to get East Africans into the economy, the so-called European economy, they are to tax people. And the insidious design of that taxation was that once you start asking these guys for tax, then they will have no choice but to try to go and work so that they can find money, because taxes were paid in British currency, to find money to pay that tax to the British. And the target, of course, was men, because it's men. The societies were mostly patriarchal. And then when that didn't really work very effectively, they introduced another tax, which was called the poor tax. So if you had a hat, an African hat, which was most Africans' hats, everybody had a hat. And then that hat had a pole in the middle, which was a design that we used to build those hats with. So you have to pay tax for the hat and tax for the pole. And again, this was designed to make sure that the men go and work and look for cash to be able to pay these taxes. And then beyond that, they also introduced another tax that is rarely discussed, which is called breast tax. Breast tax meant that any women in the house, for example, if I'm married and I have daughters, I have to pay tax for all the women who have breasts in my home, either the wife and the daughters that I have. And again, this was just to squeeze men and force them to go now to work in the plantations, whether they were sisal plantations or coffee plantations or tea plantations or wheat and maize plantations or ranches, where the white people were rearing animals. So you can imagine how brutal this was. People who maybe just a few decades prior were just going about their business all over Africa, in harmony as communities, in harmony with their neighboring communities. A few cattle raids here and there, but not really anything major. all of a sudden you are thrust to a point where someone comes and takes over your land, and even you had now to go and work for them so that you can pay taxes to them. These are strangers who have come from and you don't know where. And then not only that, but there's also now restriction of movement. You cannot move from one place to another. You need to get a kipande or ID for you to be able to move from one region to another region, to even get a job. These guys even banned traditional vegetables. They force people to take sukuma wiki and cabbages and tomatoes because traditional vegetables just grew, freely, and they could not be exploited economically. It's interesting that due to lifestyle diseases, most of us Africans now are going back to those traditional foods that were initially declared ushenzi or backward. To answer you, that is why the young people need to be conscious, because that uprooting that happened in the 1800s and early 1900s of our communities from their traditional way, that destroyed the social cohesion that we have, resulted in trauma. And most of us have not revisited those traumas to date. Our societies have not examined those traumas. And beyond that, after that, then of course there were the wars of liberation that resulted in many of our ancestors being put in concentration camps. Here in Kenya, my community, the Kikuyu, the men were put in concentration camps all over the country. The women the elders and the young kids were put in villages that was surrounded by spikes during the the Mama War. And these guys would be so brutal, brutalizing the women. The women would be raped by the colonial chief or his askaris, or the people who are taking care of these concentration camps. And a lot of kids, for example, Kikuyu kids were born without their fathers. Their mothers had to bring them up alone, and that is in the 50s. And this again dislocated the smallest unit of the society, which is the family. And I think the Kikuyus have never recovered, and most of them are not even aware that they have those traumas that they are dealing with. So then when you bring in now capitalism, that is what this economy was predicated about, was capitalism, and later on neoliberalism, whereby it's all about extracting and exploitation of the people. To date, most people wake up and go to work, spend their life, wake up 8 a.m., go to work, get back in the evening for wages, and you think that's how life is supposed to be. And this then has resulted in very dysfunctional families, a dysfunctional society. Governments that we have that think they are empowered to exploit us, just the same way we were exploited by the colonialists, not to serve us, but to exploit us. And these are what I'm calling the generational traumas. Slavery too, we had not, before colonialism came, we had slavery. We've not had a chance to examine these traumas as a society. So young people could be facing issues and challenges right now. As I said, a lot of people don't even know they're suffering from mental health issues. But if you look at the drunkenness, if you look at the social deviance within our societies, then it points to mental health issues. But because also our healthcare system is not developed enough to be able to diagnose these things and be able to treat them, and then how do you treat mass trauma anyway? So that's the reason why I feel our young people, for them to be able to overcome these traumas, and it's your generation, Fred, that has to figure it out, because a lot of us are in denial. My generation and the generations that have come before me. I'm gonna be 50 soon. My generation is I think it's a lost generation in terms of this issue. Let me leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mwalimu. My concern is, I know you have been a teacher, you have worked with community, you have been around a lot of interactions. So I would like to know if it's true that it's women that are more affected twice the rate of men on depression or on mental health. Is it true?
I don't have the statistics, so I can't say I'm an expert in that. But what I would say is that I think women are more expressive. They're able to express when they are unwell. Men bottle it in. So I wouldn't say. I don't know. I don't know that there's statistics that support that, but I would say from my experience, actually, it's even worse with men, because if we look at the rate of suicide, I think in East Africa it's higher among men than women. Men commit suicide more than women. I think what men tend to do is cover it up. You're socialized and taught that be a man. Don't cry, don't show weakness, don't show any. Even if you're suffering, bottle it up, that kind of thing. I hope that responds to your question.
Yeah, I guess it does. From what you shared, Mwalimu, which was quite an interesting perspective and uncovering some of the historical facts that some of us have not been able to read or take time to understand. I want to bring us to currently where we are. Yeah, I think the challenges we face across Africa are not very different socioeconomically. And I'm thinking, for you talked about the capitalist state and how it has given a mindset to people. I need to wake up every day, go to work, and that's the routine that goes on over and over again. And we don't see that changing, in the the nearby future anyway. But I'm thinking about a young person right now, who has a degree and they have not, for example, sat down to think about mental health or even generational traumas, like how you've explained. But then they're into the system, they have to work, they have to find a job, they have to survive, and they have to deal with all these kind of pressures. As someone who has the experience you have and knows what you know, and I'm sure you've met different kinds of people, what advice do you give to young people that are being faced by these social society pressures, by this kind of system that they've not sat down to break down and understand, but it has taken them up and it presses them and it usually pushes them to the mental health issues that they don't even know they're having? What advice would you give to that kind of young person?
Uh, what I know right now is that the way forward is for us to seek knowledge, is to organize platforms like these ones, whereby we are exchanging ideas, we are examining some of these unexamined conversations. For example, let's say you're East African. You have an economy that is still an extractive colonial state. It only works for the ruling class and their friends, a few. The economy is not creating jobs for East Africans. But there are opportunities. The only thing is that because our education system kind of teaches us, we have an education system that was developed in the 1800s or the 19th century, and it was basically meant to cut off, produce managers, supervisors, and workers for various trades within the industrial during the industrial revolution. But that's that dynamic has changed. For example, for example, East African countries are not creating any meaningful industrial development that can employ all these people that are being produced by our education system. Yet our economies, our leadership, political leadership, continues to push this education system that is not basically knowledge based. Is more of by cutoff, I mean it's meant to find a certain number of people who will go on to high school, a certain number of people go to university, a certain number of people who will then proceed to the job market. But this job market has shrunk. So I think for the young people, the advantage you have maybe over our generation is that you're also living in the information age. We are now in the fourth and the fifth industrial revolution, which most of my generation don't understand. You're interconnected not just through the internet, but also in many other ways. For example, Fred, I know you're Ugandan. You have to follow the colonial borders. You're right now in Tanzania, and you're having this conversation. I'm in Kenya, and I'm sure some of the listeners are from all over Africa. Some could be from the diaspora. So that connectivity is what is going to be the future. I'm always very shocked that we say we got independence, as Africans, but we still maintain the divisions that were created by the Europeans in 1885. The borders that were drawn by some Europeans seated in a club somewhere in Berlin. They just took a map and started drawing straight lines across. And we have maintained those states, which are totally unviable. We have we even have armies to protect those states. Can you imagine how illogical that is? I don't know whose army the Tanzanian army is protecting Tanzania from, whether it's from Kenyans or Ugandans or Burundians or whoever. So what the young people, I think, have to do is imagine what my generation and the one that have come before have refused to imagine. An Africa where these colonial borders are gone. An Africa where if you have ideas, then those ideas can be nurtured to grow a different kind of economy that is not a colonial extractive state. So I think mainly for the young people to come from when you accept that you can exchange ideas and you can look for solutions, because solutions are always with people, and the people who need to find solutions for their future are mostly the young people. And I can tell you the older generation, the generation of our politicians, is not going to find those solutions because they're products of the old ways of extraction.
Thank you so much, Mwalimu. I just wanted to know if traumas can be inherited, because you spoke about slavery, colonialism, and stuff. So can it be inherited to?
That's a good question. Yeah, in fact, if you speak to professionals, there are several ways of there could be two ways of inheriting traumas. One is through socialization. For example, if your grandfather or great grandfather was brutalized, let's say by colonialists, and then developed mental health challenges then, which he wasn't aware that he had. And then when he was bringing up his family, he brutalized his wife and his kids. And then those kids also brutalized now, let's say, for example, and that's when Fred asked me about myself. I've experienced brutality from my father, and he experienced brutality from his father. And I've fought very hard, not as a person, not to emulate, that kind of violence and transfer it to my kids. That's one, and that is documented. How if you're violent, if you have violent parents, you're likely to also be violent when you become a parent, and this is usually subconscious. These traumas or neurosis is usually subconscious, although it's treatable. But then treatment comes only when you accept that there's an issue. So a lot of us are violent within our societies, and you're not even aware why we are violent. It's because that's how we've been socialized. Then that's one. There are others who argue that actually trauma becomes genetic, that you can actually inherit it genetically. Those traumas, mental health traumas. And the argument is that usually the genes that we have are the same. All of us have the same genes, but their genes are activated depending on the environment, what you're facing. For example, if you're facing drought or plenty or floods or whatever, there's some genes that will be activated. There are some genes that will be deactivated for you to be able to deal with the environment you're in. Such that if you're in a very traumatized space, if you're in a space where you're facing, for example, attacks, or you're facing threats due to issues of, issues of, let's say you're being raided by some people, and that triggers some certain genes. And then when you, now as parents, you pass on those genes to your kids. And that way, some of these traumas the argument is that they can actually be passed on through generations, through our genes. So, and I think that is one of, it's an area that psychologists and scientists are really exploring, in terms of whether that is factual and how to deal with it.
Thank you, Mwalimu. If you're in the space and you'd like to share an experience or ask a question, you can request to speak and you'll be allowed to speak. From what you shared, Mwalimu, there's sometime we're talking and you're telling me about how you feel like Africans don't live to their full potential. That you earlier explained and shared about this mental change that we have that we don't realize we have. How do you feel like actually how do you feel like Africans, especially young Africans, can fight through to live to their full potential? And I get this from the story you shared of Mwai Kibaki and how he was in school by mistake, and how usually Africans take long to actually get into the places they should be. How do you think that can change?
Yeah, maybe I could give that story briefly, the story of Mwai Kibaki. We are told that Mwai Kibaki ended up going to school by accident. Yet Kenyans will agree that of all the five presidents we've had, or let's say the ones who've come, the four that have been there before the current one, Mwai Kibaki's leadership was way better than the three others. And even when he was Minister for Finance during the presidency of the first president, Jomo Kenyatta, he was able to do so much during that time in terms of the economic progression that Kenya had. And then when he left, first as Minister for, I think, Economic Planning, and then as Minister for Finance, then Kenya experienced the downturn that happened during in the 80s and 90s. Mwai Kibaki, as the story is told, was this young boy in his village in Nyeri. When the colonialists decided that they needed some young Africans to help with the colonial project, so they decreed that every family had to give at least one son to go and work, to go to school. And now when Kibaki's father was asked to provide one son, he said, there's this son of mine who, when I asked him to look after my goats, they always, he always gets into dreamland, and the goats always go to eat in the neighbors' farms. So that's the one you should take, because he wasn't hardworking, in terms of the traditions then, working in the farms and that kind of thing. So Kibaki's father felt he was the guy to go to school. So here you have a scenario where this boy goes to, I think he was in class 4 or something like that, goes to school because he was a reject in terms of the economy then. And then was top of his class. Kibaki was top of his class from when he did the exam, the exam in primary school. He was top in the Commonwealth, not just in Kenya or East Africa for that matter. Then he went to high school. Again, he was top in the Commonwealth. He got the best marks in the whole of the Commonwealth area. Then he went to Makerere he went to Makerere, first class honors, and then went to Lana School of Economics, whereby he also graduated top of his class. So here you have a guy, a young boy who, let's say, you can actually say he went to school by accident, but now goes and tops, tops not just the region, but the Commonwealth. Now imagine also Kibaki with all his brilliance, now being top in the region and being top in the Commonwealth. Joined the government as a chief executive officer of KANU, and then joined the Kenya government in various roles, but basically built the infrastructure of the Kenyan government. But even for him, it took him 40 years when he was right at the center of government with all those opportunities. It took 40 years for him to ascend to the presidency, where he could then implement his ideas, and that is what I call arrested development. So this is one young boy, and if you count the number of young boys and girls who are his age mates, and you try to estimate, so a guy like him with all his level of access took 40 years for his potential to be realized. How many have we lost as Africans who didn't get the same opportunity, who didn't get the same kind of exposure as Kibaki did, who are not getting that exposure today as we speak, because our system, again, is exploitative. We have states that believe, that their work is to extract taxation from us and put it in the pockets of a few, our rulers, whether it's in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, or it's a global system that is basically just extracting from us. It's not investing in our young people. So part of the challenges these young people are facing are actually by design, and this design is a colonial design. And so my contention is that what you have to do, and the reason why I consider myself a movement builder and a community organizer, is to we need to organize our communities to think beyond the current paradigms, the current leaderships. And I'm saying that because our leaders right now are very comfortable in this economy. This economy works for them. because they can exploit us, they can overtax us, and they become billionaires. As you can see, the better a robber baron you are, the higher you rise politically in Kenya or East Africa. And so we have to think out of this box. I think I have to keep saying that we have to, the young people, Fred, you, and others have to think beyond our current paradigm. Otherwise, that's the only way to overcome what I call arrested development. The arrested development, the potential that Africa has, that East Africa has, that Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania have, that is totally, unexploited. And by exploitation, I don't mean the exploitation of using. It means that there are many geniuses among us, like Kibaki. There are many geniuses, some young, some old, who have gone to waste because we have a system that does not allow even thinking differently. If you look at the societies that have progressed very well, if you look at Scandinavia, look at Singapore, it's a place where ideas are welcome. Ideas that are different are welcome, and they create an education system that allows people to think differently and share those thoughts, so that one generation always improves on what the previous generation has done. But in Africa right now, all over across the continent, right now, for example, in Kenya, very few people can afford to own a home, to buy a piece of land and build a home. Yet our parents were able to do that, and we keep asking ourselves how they were able to do that. But it's very worrying that when usually in progressive societies, young people build upon the wealth of their parents. Here, our parents have become paupers, and a lot of the young people are actually, even before you start working, you're in debt. If you go to university, you get university debt. If you don't go to university or you go to college, because of the borrowing, for example, that either Museveni or Ruto and Uhuru or Samia Suluhu in Tanzania is borrowing from the whichever borrowers. You are born with for example, in Kenya, I think we are at 130,000 Kenya shillings of debt. That is already traumatizing. Before you even breathe, you're in debt. So yeah. I hope that responds. I know I've gone on and on, but I'm very passionate about these issues.
Thank you, Mwalimu. Again, if you want to say something, if you want to share an experience, please you can. I have a question, but I think Irene wants to say something. I can go after you, Irene.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, despite the fact that the legacy of slavery has affected mental health of most Black communities, why is it that most of the African countries ignore the issue of mental health? Or is it because of ignorance, or do not have the right institutions to air out these issues? Why is it still a problem?
Thanks, Irene. I have a theory around this, which is controversial. So my thinking is this, that our societies, our traditional societies, and I'm not overpraising, it was not all bliss traditionally, but we had organized our societies in a way that we took care of each other. There's a saying that a child belongs to the village. For example, to become a leader within the traditional society, you needed to be, for example, if you're born, let me use my community, the Kikuyu, and I'm sure that's how many of our traditional societies were organized. I would be born into a family, and as a boy, there are rituals that my family had to do. If I was a girl, there are things that the family had to perform, and not only the family but also the clan. And then I'd start growing. Let's say we have in the year on the day I was born, 100 other boys were born, or boys and girls. There are things that each family had to do. And if they didn't do those, they didn't perform those rituals, there were consequences in terms of my growing up, which spaces I can be allowed to. And sometimes if my parents couldn't perform, for example, if there was a goat to be slaughtered and my parents didn't have the goat, the clan would contribute that goat, or my father's brothers would contribute that goat to ensure that I'm a fully, accepted member of that society. And so we took care of each other. And if you didn't perform the rights as stipulated, then you'd have stigma. For example, this is what a stigma would mean. Then if you're like going to have circumcision as a rite of passage, you could not, go through that stage of rite of passage unless your community or your parents have performed certain rites, or your community, your clan has performed those rites. Then, if let's say they are done and now you've been circumcised and all that, which was the rite of passage, which allowed you to then you know, access certain knowledge from within the community, have access to certain spaces where you could then even think about getting married now. Um, that and you're advised by elders and thing, and then maybe you could even become a junior warrior if you're a man, and then become a warrior. And let's say in between the 100 boys that were born at the same time as I, let's say it's you, Fred, your uncle goes and makes a young girl pregnant somewhere. The chances of you, Fred, either becoming a warrior are gone, not because of anything you've done or anything your father has done, but because of what your uncle did. And you say, if a child belongs to the village, if you guys as a clan or as a family cannot take care of the rest of society, then how do we trust Fred with this thing? And if you go all that way, to the point where the entire society is observing not only what you're doing as a person, but also what your family members are doing, what your clan members are doing, to the point where becoming a junior elder, becoming an elder, a village elder would be very few. Of the 100 boys, if they all live, maybe only one or two would make it to eldership, because of things sometimes not even they have done. And I used to consider that, for me, it's a very democratic system, because it involved the entire society to scrutinize not only my behavior but the behaviors of my family, behavior of my extended family, behavior of my clan, etc, etc. And what the white person did when they came, so they will find, let's say, in my village in Kirenyaga, they will find a council of elders of 11 elders. And all these guys are considered not only the wisest of the old men. There are many old men, but these are the wisest of them. But also they are the ones whose families uh, have have fulfilled the stipulation of the society, as I've illustrated. It's not just their own personal wisdom, but also the fact that their families are fully integrated into the belief systems and the cultural practices of the society. And I think in my opinion, what the white man did to break this democracy and to break this society and that egalitarian organization that Africans had, they identified people within the society who are, first of all, resentful against this system, and they made them chiefs. And then they gave them what are called the tribal police. In Kenya, that has morphed into what is called the administration police. And I think there are many iterations all over different countries, whereby once you're made a chief and you're given the police. I remember the ordinance of the administration police in Kenya, 1936 or 35, said that the purpose of this police. Remember, you have, let's say, 10 white people who want to rule 7 million people in Africa. in Kenya, in the territory called Kenya. How do you do that? You have to find allies within the communities. So the tribal police, the ordinance of the tribal police said, your work is to brutalize the natives to submission on behalf of the white people who want to rule you. And so that is a system then that was created to reward those who sold out their communities, those who brutalized their communities on behalf of these white people. And then these people now were allowed to accumulate wealth, and using this wealth, they were able to take their kids to school, both locally and internationally. And when we got independence, then these are the people who, although they are not the ones who fought for independence, these are the people who the colonialists handed over the colonial governments to. And so if you look at people like Museveni, people like the Kenyattas, people like the Obotes and all, and others, a lot of our leadership, our political leadership, are people who were beneficiaries of this extractive colonial state. In Kenya, we call them the collaborators or the home guards from a community in Kikuyu. And these are the people who exploited their own communities on behalf of the white people. And I consider that also because if you dislocate yourself from your community, that in itself is a neurosis. It's a trauma. It's a mental health issue. The fact that you can sell out your community to foreigners who have come in, I consider that health. Yet these are the people who are now emulated, who are role models, who are people we look up to, who are the people who are leading our countries, who are the people who are leading our economies. And that's when when we say that we have politicians who don't care. They don't care because the reward that they have received from the time of colonialism up to now has been from selling out their societies. So why should they change if it works for them? So that we are dealing with many traumas here. We have a traumatized political class, and you have a traumatized population, and we are all hurting each other. If I can put it plainly, and most of us are doing this without even being aware. We are doing it by remote control because you're not even, having the conversation you're having right now. We're not having these conversations. I got into this conversation after the post-election violence in 2007, when I overheard one of our leading psychologists, he's called Dr. Frank Jenga, talk about the trauma of the young people who are killing each other in Rift Valley. And then because there were no consequences, going back to live together with the people whose houses they had burnt, who they had hacked with pangas and machetes. And because we are a society that does not examine these things, and there are no consequences, then those people are living together, and how that then would result in even more brutality. We are talking about gender violence within our societies. Are we even examining where this gender violence comes from? Like how our parents, our grandparents were socialized brutally. I remember my late mom, telling me when she went to school in the 50s, high school in Kabare in Kirinyaga, that if you are late for class, you'd be told to kneel down, and not only kneel down, they had paved the pavements in the school were done using kokoto. I don't know what to call it, with the loose gravel. And you'd be told to walk on your knees a certain distance, 100 meters or 50 meters. And by the time you're coming out of there, you're bloody. Your knees are bloody. And then you go to class. You can imagine going through that kind of brutalization on your young girl, or because she was in a girls' school. And then, no, that I think it was mixed. Later on, it turned into a girls' school. But imagine you're being taught this education, and you're being educated, and then you're being brutalized at the same time. And these are the people now who even to date, our politicians, and I'll just name names. You look at Ruto, look at the Uhuru Kenyatta, look at Museveni. These are people who if they were to sit down with a psychiatrist, these are nutcases. because if you look at what they are doing to their societies and accumulating crazy amount of money that they can never finish. Their families, up to 10 generations, can never finish that kind of money, and they are still accumulating more. That is a neurosis. It's a new gonjo. It's not normal. But we look up to them as leaders, as our what. So in a roundabout manner, I hope I've responded to your question. But I think you're in a very if you're looking for help from these guys cannot. Remember, there's a saying about mental health. For you to be able to heal, then you need to first of all admit that you have a problem, and until you do that as a society, which would mean then we institutionalize, for example, the entire Kenyan Parliament and Senate would be taken to Mathare, which is a mental hospital here in Kenya. And I'm saying that in jest, but I'm very serious also. Because you have people who are suffering from crazy mental health issues, running society, and then you have citizens who are also, brutalized and traumatized. And we seem to be in that mix where we don't know which way to go. So Eileen, I hope nimekujibu.
Thank you, Mwalimu. So as we wind up the space, again, I want to remind the audience, if you want to say something or share an experience, you can request to speak. So my last question will be, and I think I'll first share what I'm understanding from what you're saying, Mwalimu, is beyond mental health, we have to break the mental barriers that we have. And Muthoni here said something that about how the kids have to be educated, but also allowed to think for themselves. And another thing is what I've picked from this other explanation you're giving is that unsolved generational traumas and mental issues also means that we have leaders that are not, completely fine mentally, so they cannot recognize these kind of issues. And by that, not that they're crazy or something like that, but they're unresolved generational traumas. My last question would be, and again, I'll take it from something Muthoni shared there. You as a person who is into this space, activism, community building, what you're doing is contrarian. It's not something that most people will opt to do. And I feel like most young people still want to do some things, want to be contrarian, but you're used to a system and particular way things have to be done. So you find that people choose to go with their normal careers, doing the usual normal things, and don't opt to chase their dreams or their passion. And a person like you who's doing what passionately, what advice can you give for someone who has a dream, has something within them to push for something or do something? What advice would you give them to take the direction? But also for a person like you, what keeps you going besides the passion that you have? What keeps you going every day to choose to do what you do?
Thank you so much, Fred. So I would say what I've done if you get into the revolutionary space is committed what is called class suicide, because a lot of the people in my generation are the ones who are serving the superstructure. They are right now my peers are the managers of institutions, banks, logistic firms, ranches, transport companies, insurance companies, etc. that belong to the elite, to the ruling class. And they are quite comfortable because they can then afford to live in certain neighborhoods. They can afford to drive certain cars. They can afford to belong to certain clubs. And for me, and I've been there, I've been in business, but I got to a point where I could not face myself. As I told you, I also had mental health challenges because of the traumas from my past. my first marriage failed, and that's the point where I started examining myself and my past, and what that has contributed to me being who I am, to me not being able to sustain that kind of relationship. Um, and in examining that, that's where I came to learn a lot about our society and how our societies were created, from the colonial time to today, how capitalism works, why it's exploitative, and who it serves. And the thing is that I think the advantage now we have, or your generation has, is information. So I've decided to do this because I was worried. I used to ask myself, how come I was finding a lot of this information when I was in my 30s, my early 30s, and I was like, just like Kibaki, when I went to primary school, I was top of my class most of the time. High school, I was among, I was not doing too badly. I went to a provincial school, which guaranteed, like, out of 120 people, at least 115 would go to university. And I went to university, and life was a breeze, basically, education wise. And for me to find out at 34 that the history that I've learned is fake, what I thought I knew. In fact, a new period of re-education began then, when I went into depression because of mental health challenges, when my marriage failed. And for me to discover these things, I was very apolitical. That's when I started connecting in terms of how politics influences society, how not being an active citizen then means that you have these people who are leading us, who are basically facing mental health challenges, but they are not even aware. You have an entire society of if you had to use the African word, would be mad people. Uh, uh, that the young people now have a chance, because I could not find mentors then, but I chose now to be a mentor to the next generation, to your generation and the next generation. And that's a personal choice I did. And it's not easy, especially when you're in a society that classifies people based on how your bank account and what car you drive and what neighborhood you live and what clothes you wear, what phone you have, and which has been very mainstreamed for your generation by the internet and by pop culture, music, movies, and that kind of thing. But your generation has to step out. And I think the advantage that you have, the connectivity that you have, interconnectivity that you have, is the one that is going to help. But you also have to build communities that are working for each other, so that if it's about jobs, you're creating jobs for each other, then, and dignifying jobs, that, or rather, let me not use job, but use work that is that helps you meet your obligations, either pay for your school fees, or, if you're married, is able to feed your family, take your kids to school, live in a decent, dignified house, have food on the table. Uh, and I think that's the way forward. It's to build the future governance. The future of governance, in my view, would be the small communities that we create, but also the larger community, the Pan-African community that you're going to culturalize going forward. These borders. There's a campaign by Africans Rising called Borderless Africa. I think that campaign has potential to raise the game to another level, and it's the young people, your generations, that need to imagine a future where you're not limited by some border that was drawn in 1885 by a white man somewhere. Uh, you're not limited by Museveni and his army just because he wants to loot Congo or to loot the oil that has been found in Uganda. You're not limited by the restrictions that Chama cha Mapinduzi will put in Tanzania, or the looting, the government of crooks that William Ruto has put in Kenya. A cabinet full of thieves and murderers and rapists, just to dumb down the society and to desensitize the young generation, so that you lose total hope. But I think with these kind of things, I'm hoping that these kind of spaces will be available. They will not be shut down. I know Tanzania and Uganda have done, have put in policies that are meant to limit access to the internet, because they don't want us exchanging ideas. They don't want us organizing ourselves. They don't want us coming together and having such conversations as you're having. And I'm hoping that, although I see it happening in Kenya, because I know the guy who's in power and what kind of person he is. He does not tolerate dissent. He's a pathological liar, and of course charismatic. So the way forward, Fred, is for people like you. Let me use the example of Sankara, Lumumba, and those who have the Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Jesus Christ, and all the other revolutionaries who have gone before us. What lesson do we learn from them? The lesson we learn is that when you operate alone, you can be taken out by the status quo. So what we need, imagine if we had 1,000 Sankaras in Africa. Imagine if we had 1,000 Malcolm X's or 1,000 Martin Luther Kings. I think the solutions that we are going to need as Africans, and that are going to help us with the final liberation, are not going to come from messianic figures, one individual who then transforms society. It's our ability to create several thousands of messiahs in all our communities, which is what I call movement building. It's identifying people across Africa who are willing to go beyond the normal call of duty, to work for just themselves, but also to work for the betterment of the wider society, which is basically going back to our traditional societies, whereby they were egalitarian. A child belonged to the village. I think that's the way forward, and it's up to your generation, I guess, to rediscover what we lost in the last 400 years. I say that we have history of Africa over 8,000 years documented, but we've been focused on the last 400 years of the white man and his colonialism and racism. And I think it's time to go beyond that. It's time to do away with these colonial borders, starting with the mental borders initially, and then find the next Fred Kaskazini, the one who's in South Africa, the one who's in West Africa, the one who's in North Africa, the one who's in the diaspora, and come together and build the society for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mwalimu. I think we usually have two questions, also culture questions in the space. I think you've answered the last one. If we have no one requested to speak, our very last question would be usually ask our speakers. So, Mwalimu, the last question is, for what impact do you want to most be remembered for in your legacy as an African? And also, we would like you to upload or mention one African that you see that around the continent or in Kenya, wherever it is, that you feel is doing a good job in whatever industry they are, whatever they're pushing for.
That's it's a hard question to ask. Let's say the legacy I'd want to live is, as a Mwalimu, is that I've catalyzed conversations that have helped the next generation of Africans overcome the mental and physical barriers that were put in here to try and keep us divided so they can be ruled. So if I can be able to travel from Cape Town to Cairo, or from Kismayo to Libreville or Liberia or Western Sahara, with one passport, without finding any barriers across the borders. And this protocol has been passed there that African countries are refusing to implement because it serves their colonial masters. And if we can have young Africans organizing themselves to solve their problems, not even to fight governments, to solve their problems, to create jobs, to create work, meaningful, dignified work. That would be my dream. In terms of one Africa, it's very hard to talk about one. I just want to celebrate, for example, in Kenya, very many Africans or Kenyans who are organizing their communities. They are fighting against, this neoliberal, extractive colonial state where, some people are trying to grab their land. Some people are trying to to push them off their settlements so that either they can build some capitalist structure, or just trying to mitigate, where there are no schools, they build schools to make sure that the kids are getting an education. Where there's no food, they're organizing in their communities. There are guys who are building houses for the elderly who are living in very dilapidated houses. There are people who are fundraising for communities that cannot put one meal on the table a day. So those are the ones I want to celebrate and recognize. And there are many nameless Kenyans. I have the names, but naming them, and that is a point of hope that there are many, many Kenyans and Africans who are doing amazing things across the continent. Thanks. Thank you.
I don't know if there's something Irene you'd want to add. If you can add, then we can try to wind up the space. Do you have something, Irene?
No, I just want to thank Mwalimu for sharing with us the knowledge and the experiences he has had before. Yeah, we are really glad to have you in our space tonight. I think we should wind up. Since we don't have any person asking a question, I think we should close the space now.
So thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure. Let's talk again soon.
Yeah, yes. If we don't have anyone asking a question, then we shall wind up the next 3 minutes. Once again, Mwalimu, we thank you. It's a pleasure having you in the space and sharing all you've shared. I think my biggest takeaway is that unsolved generational traumas affect us more than we realize, and they're around us, they're within us. We need to pay attention and think of mental health. Let's think of those barriers that don't realize actually holding us back, but the barriers that have been carried on through generations. And as young people today, we need to fight those barriers, because one thing from what you said, Mwalimu, even disunity alone is something that's been carried through generations, and people choose to stay disunited because of particular traumas that they think of other communities and other people. So I hope that anyone who has been with us for the whole month, I hope you've learned something. We come here to learn, share. We come here to share and learn something together. And yeah, we are a growing community of ordinary young East Africans and Africans that come to have these conversations about social and economic topics I believe are shaping the future. I still see no one requesting to speak, so I think we shall close up the space. Asante sana Mwalimu, asante Irene and everyone that's been on the space. I see Therapist with Kimani and everyone else in the audience. So thank you guys for being part of the conversation. It's a good night from me. Irene, do you have any parting shots? Then we can close. I think Irene is off. Asante sana Mwalimu. Hope to have
I
a conversation next time. Thank you. You can also give your parting shots, Mwalimu, if you have anything more to say.
No, there's just to thank you and Irene for the opportunity, and thank everybody who has tuned in. Let's continue the conversation.
Sawa. Siku mwema.
Asanteni. Have a nice weekend.
Sawa. Let's go watch World Cup, guys.